rise in opposition of Senate Bill 1EX because the Republican maps from the Georgia State Senate does not comply with Judge Jones's order. We were wisely reminded today by our awesome leader, Mr. Speaker, that a story seldom told is soon forgotten. I think it's very important to discuss the history that led to the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Knowing our history is so important, especially today where there is an intentional effort to prevent Black history from being taught to the next generation. My grandmother, who is 89 years of age, born in 1934, worked 32 years for the state of Georgia cleaning floors and toilets and beds for people with disabilities and disabled veterans at Central State Hospital in Milledgeville. She used to often tell me, you cannot know where you're going if you don't know from where you came. The history of the racial discrimination in Georgia is deeply rooted in the legacy of slavery, segregation, and systemic racism. By 1750, a few years after the colony of Georgia was founded, slavery was permitted in Georgia. For more than 100 years, Georgia was a slave state that built its wealth on the backs of African-American slaves. During this time, slavery became deeply ingrained in the social and economic fabric of Georgia. It was not until the defeat of the Confederacy in 1865 and ratification of the 13th Amendment to the Constitution that slavery in Georgia was abolished. Following the Civil War was the period of Reconstruction that lasted for about 10 years, from 1865 to 1877. Efforts to integrate African Americans into civic life were met with fierce resistance, especially in former Confederate states like Georgia. In 1868, 3 years after the abolishment of slavery, 33 African Americans were elected to the Georgia General Assembly. These were among the first African American state legislators in the United States. 24 of the original 13 were ministers, just like the ministers that we invite every day to lead us into our opening session. What was the response from this body? Southern white legislators took action to expel the original 33 because they simply felt they did not belong. The third branch of government, the courts, had to step in and reinstate these legislators 2 years later, just like the court stepped in again to protect the voice and constitutional right of Black voters in this state, which is why we are here today. Following the hope of Reconstruction came the period of Jim Crow that lasted nearly 100 years from the late 19th century until 1965. States like Georgia implemented Jim Crow laws to reestablish white supremacy and control over African Americans by enforcing racial segregation and undermining the civil and political rights gained through Reconstruction. My grandmother was born during this period. Many of the rights that I have today, she did not have. 200 years of oppression gave rise to the civil rights movement in 1950 and 60s. That sought to dismantle the system of segregation and discrimination that we had inherited. By 1965, slavery was gone, but Jim Crow was alive in Georgia, just like other former states of the Confederacy, preventing African Americans from voting and electing their candidates of choice. This is history. It's uncomfortable. The truth is not always comfortable. But as great Georgians, we have accepted that truth and we have moved forward collectively to make a great difference for this state and its people. The Civil Rights Movement led to the enactment of 1965 Voting Rights Act, which is one of the most successful, transformative pieces of legislation to address racial discrimination in voting. For more than 50 years, the Voting Rights Act protected Georgia voters from practices like drawing legislative maps in a racial discriminatory manner. And yet, this landmark legislation was gutted and weakened by Republican-appointed judges in 2013. And now today, actions continuing the attacks against the protections of the Voting Rights Act persist. This Thanksgiving break, I had family in town. My wife and I decided to host for the first time. It was a great experience for us, and as a young couple here in Georgia, We were proud to accept people from all across the Southeast to our great state so we can show off our amazing roles, how economic development and why economic development is important to us. And we ventured just a little up the road from Columbus, Georgia to this place called the Little White House. If you haven't been there, you definitely need to go see it. That was where President FDR spent a lot of his time. And there, some of my family members from throughout the Southeast learned about a president that worked and focused on bringing Americans together, providing opportunities for all. Opportunities folks like my grandmother never had. On January the 9th, 2023, I was sworn into this body. My grandmother sat right up there at the top row in the right part of this gallery. And when I was done, I went to her and I gave her a big hug. And she said to me, son, I cleaned floors on my hands and my knees so that you could stand on the House floor of the state capitol. But that is not possible if our people are not given opportunity to elect those that look like them. That is not possible if we're going to continue to play games with maps and put folks where we want them versus allowing folks to choose the people that they want. That moment in my eyes, that moment in my soul, my grandmother represented the long line of women and African Americans who have been disenfranchised right here in the state of Georgia. Though I remind you of our checkered past and ask you vote no on this bill, we already know what will happen today. We were not ordered back here by Judge Jones to maintain the status quo. We were ordered here to change Georgia's map so that they reflect the inevitable shift in Georgia's population and give voice to the deserving and innocent citizens of the state of Georgia. I want to leave you with, again, what a great man once told us just this morning. A story seldom told is soon forgotten. What will history reflect about this special session in the state of Georgia, December of 2023? Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield the way.